It's wonderful that you've joined us. If you've been joining us part of the webinar series before, that's fantastic. If this is your first one, then it's wonderful that you're here. These webinars, this webinar and all of these webinars are being delivered as part of the Northern Ireland Botanical Skills Project in Northern Ireland, which is a project which is supporting botanists across the skills spectrum with training, events, and online webinars like this. And clearly getting started with grasses, sedges, and rushes has been particularly popular. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our funder, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs in Northern Ireland. Their logo is here, and without them, this webinar series and the entire project wouldn't be possible. So huge thank you to them. As I have already alluded to several times, this is part of a series of webinars. All of our previous webinars, all the ones that happened before Christmas, are on the BSBI YouTube page. When I will send a link out to you in the next couple of days with a link to the recording of this video, but also a link to all of the previous recordings, just in case you missed them, weren't aware of them, and you'd really like to learn more about Equisetum or Dryopteris or any of the other wonderful subjects we've already done so far. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. And there is a Q&A button at the bottom down here somewhere. If you put questions in that as they occur to you, then at the end I will serve questions to Jen, our expert, and we will get through as many of those as time allows. And I think that's all the kind of how this talk works and where it comes from. So I'm going to introduce our speaker today, Jen Farrar, who works for the BSBI as our Botanical Skills Officer in Northern Ireland. Jen has been involved with teaching plant identification and plant and flower morphology for over 15 years. She's taught botanists from complete beginners to those studying for an MSc in plant taxonomy and biodiversity at the Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh. In her current role, Jen is particularly keen to demystify looking at plants and assist people in building confidence in their observational and identification skills. And so I'm going to hand over to Jen for this evening's talk.
Hello, and welcome everybody to this webinar this evening on grasses, sedges and rushes for complete beginners. This really is a sort of it will be a fairly basic chat about those three groups. And I'm talking specifically about, in terms of grasses, there are so many different genera, sort of small groups within the family, that I'm not going to talk about necessarily about individual genera. With the sedges and rushes, I will be talking specifically about this in sedges, the genus Carex, and in rushes, the genus Juncus, because they take up the largest part of those two families. If you feel that you would like me to expand on those families at some point in the future, then you can always send a request. Okay, so some of you might have heard this little rhyme. Sedges have edges, rushes are round, and grasses have nodes from their heads to the ground. You might be wondering why I've got asterisks scattered everywhere. Well, that is because sedges have edges, except those that don't. Rushes are round, except those that aren't. And grasses have nodes from their heads to the ground, which is only really useful for ID to family if you happen to be in the temperate areas. Once you get into the tropics, sedges have nodes too, apparently. So, but it's pretty good for all temperate grasses. So some similarities between the three groups, the sedges, rushes, and grasses. They're found in a very wide range of habitats. They share growth habits and life cycles, and they have common inflorescence characteristics. So a wide range of habitats, everything from coastal to alpine, for all three groups. Some grow in standing water or flowing water, others grow in bare sand, and lots of the rest of them quite enjoy having their feet in actual soil rather than mud or sand. So for example, this marram grass, fantastic grass for stabilizing blown sand at the back of developing sort of away from salt burden, but in terms of being an incredibly important stabilizer of dunes. It's absolutely essential. And you can see here the roots are just going through effectively bare sand and holding it together. They share growth habits. So for example, clump forming. Here we have two different types of juncus, one in the field, a scene that we in Britain and Ireland are very familiar with. These are a perennial type of rush. I'm not sure precisely what species. And on the other side, we have one of the annual rushes, the toad rush, Juncus bufonus. So they both form clumps. You can also have runners under the soil, which are rhizomes. This is Carex arenaria, or sand sedge, which tends to grow in straight lines. They form these incredibly straight, regularly spaced plantlets for the most part. And again, that is something you will find growing in bare sand for the most part. Or on the top of soil. So for example, this is Phragmites australis, which is the common rush, common reed, beg your pardon. Here it's rooting at intervals along this stolon. So a stolon is a runner that goes along the top of the soil, and little plants are coming up along it. And this is, of course, how it colonizes into mud from wherever it's growing. As I've said already, you have annuals and perennials. Juncus bufonus, our lovely toad rush, is an annual. And of course, we have big perennial juncus too. And the same is true of all three groups. There are annual grasses, such as the Poma annua, which gardeners love to hate. And of course, things like Poa pratensis or Poa trivialis, the meadow grasses, which are perennial grasses. In terms of inflorescences, they are fairly commonly found inflorescence types that you would find throughout the plant kingdom. For the most part, we have panicles. So if you have a grass or that looks like a little tree, then that is a panicle. So basically, it's the individual inflorescences branching again and again off each other. If there's only one branch between the main stem and the flower, then it's a raceme. And you see that in things like the melicas, Melica uniflora, Melica nutans, wood millet. And then spikes, and for example, that would be in crested dog's tail, or in the sedges, they're mostly spikes. One or two of them are quite densely packed panicles in sedges as well. Things like the false fox sedge, Carex, or turbia. There are, of course, differences as well. Oops. Vegetative characteristics. There are some floral characteristics which are different, and the number of seeds per flower can be different too. So we have the vegetative characters. All of them have leaves and leaf sheaths, but in sedges and rushes, the leaf sheaths are closed and form a tube around the next developing leaf or the inflorescent stem. So this is our leaf sheath here in this Carex or Truba, the false fox sedge. And here we have the leaf sheath on toad rush, Juncus bufonus again. However, in grasses, the leaf sheaths are mostly open. And whenever you pull a leaf away from the flowering stalk, frequently you'll find that the edges will curl in. This is heathgrass and Danthonia decumbens, which we'll be seeing again later. In terms of important vegetative characteristics, there are several, and some apply to all of the families, and others are specific to individual groups. For example, here we have the ligules that you will find on both sedges and grasses. If you see here this membranous structure here, which is coming off from the sheath of the leaf, which has been pulled away gradually. Oh, I beg your pardon. Has been pulled away gradually by the photographer to expose this long membranous ligule, which is at the top of the leaf sheath and at the base of the leaf blade. And you can see that it's attached to the top of the leaf sheath, but it's otherwise free from the blade. And this is cocksfoot, or Dactylus glomerata. Here we have another grass, Poa pratensis, the smooth meadow grass. And here we can see that the ligule is quite short, but again, it's membranous. It's as you can see, it's contiguous with the leaf sheath, and the leaf blade is comes off away from that. So this is an entirely separate piece of tissue. In Carexes, however, that's not the case. Because the leaf sheath is sealed into a tube, you have it becomes more membranous at the top of that leaf sheath, and the ligule is actually attached to the leaf blade. If you were looking at a book, it would say it was adnate to the leaf blade, which just means attached. This is the leaf and stem of Carex pendula, one of the largest Carexes in the UK. And here we have another ligule. This one is from the false fox sedge again. You can see both are quite triangular. And just as a matter of note, this shape here at the top of the leaf sheath can help with species identification. So it's worth having a look at whenever you're dealing with the vegetative characters of the plant you're looking at, especially with Carex. The ligule shape and size in grasses is, of course, equally important, if not more so. There are some differences between the flowers. In rush flowers, despite them being younger than grasses and slightly older than sedges, they still have maintained what's called a perfect flower in terms of monocot flowers. So a monocot flower has its floral parts in parts of 3, and they are also have multiple lines of symmetry. So here we can see there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stamens, the male reproductive organs that produce the pollen. In the center, we have these wonderful fuzzy red, twirly stigma sticking up, which means that we have potentially 3 ovaries fused together down here. You can just see the little sort of blobby bit there. Slightly, it's not possible to see them properly, but they're what makes up the ovary and where the seeds develop here. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can just see it, 6 perianth segments or tepals. So even though these 6 organs arise in the position of the sepals and petals, so the the colourful petals and something like a buttercup and the green sepals underneath are in parts of 5. These are in parts of 3. So even though these organs are arising in the same positions as those sepals and petals would be in a buttercup, they are very similar in shape and size and colour. And therefore it is we simply call them tepals to show that they are indistinguishable from each other. However, any of you notice this little point at the top of this one? That is indicative of the fact that that's probably a sepal. So that would make this one here a petal, and then it would be sepal petal, and so on round. You don't need to know which is which. If you happen to have taught this stuff like I have for several years, then it's something that I automatically do, but please don't feel you have to. One of the other differences between rushes, sedges and grasses is that sedges and grasses will only have 1 seed per flower. And that's a reduction in the number of ovules that those, or sort of seed potentials, those groups have. In rushes, there can be 1 or many. So we have a fusion of 3 different carpels because we've got 3 separate stigmas. And inside that carpel, there could be only 1 seed, or there could be several seeds. It very much depends on the species. Sedge flowers have seen a great reduction in both the number of flower organs, but also some of those organs have changed form and function. In terms of changing form and function, I'll come to that properly in just a second, but I just want to talk about the fact that in sedges, the flowers are either male or female. They, unlike our lovely rush flower, which had both male reproductive organs and female reproductive organs on the same flower, sedges don't. They have female flowers, which have got these fuzzy stigmas, like these ones here. These are all female flowers. It's the same flower, actually. 3 fuzzy stigmas coming out from this single carpel. And then we have the male flowers at the tips of the inflorescences, in this case, these spikes, where the individual flowers don't have any stem between it and the main vein of the flower head. And something you will have noticed with sedges is that they have these structures, these sort of papery structures, which cover up the flowers, the individual flowers, and protect them as they're developing. And these are called glooms. This gloom here, this is Carex flacca. The gloom here is sort of a lovely dark chestnut brown with a green vein in the center. Behind it, in this case, a female flower. And this, usually, whenever we come to grasses, you'll see that most grasses have 2 glooms. And the glooms are the equivalent of bracts, but they've changed form and they've changed function, and they've become colored sometimes rather than just green. And the second gloom that you would find in grasses, in the sedges, that has fused into a pocket called the utricle, which is basically a vase-shaped pocket that sits around the ovary and protects it while it's keeps it in a microclimate while the seeds are developing in the inside. The characteristics of those utricles are, of course, part of the important parts of the identifying a Carex to species. And also, it's worth, if possible, seeing if you can see how many stigmas were attributed to each flower, because the number of stigmas can also help with identification. And here we come to grass flowers. So this flower here, which is from the wood millet Melica nutans, you can see here that we have two blooms, these structures here, a lovely dark purple color, and then they have this very pale, papery, like tissue paper edge. Technical term for that is hyaline. And of course, remember that most good flower books will have a glossary in them. So it's well worth, sort of, if you're not quite sure what a term is in a description of a plant, go and use the glossary. And if it's not in the glossary, have a wee stomping of feet and then go and use your Google on the phone. I will come back to the Melica flower in a second, but I just wanted to show you a typical inflorescence of a grass. In this case, this is Elytridia repens, also known as couch grass. Personally, I rather like it when it's in flower. Don't like it when I'm gardening, but that's a personal thing. You can just about see at the base of these green structures, each one of which is called a spikelet, the fuzzy stigmas also visible just about here in this Melica. And of course, we have our male reproductive organs, the stamens, hanging from each of the flowers as well. I think the term spikelet is one of the things that certainly managed to confuse me whenever I started looking at grasses. And it seems to be a perpetual cause of confusion for people, even whenever they've had a bit of experience. The spikelet is effectively a flower or a collection of flowers that are contained within the glooms, which are always at the base of the spikelet, closest to the branch or the stem of the, beg your pardon, the branch or the stem of the flowering structure. So in this case, these don't have a stem. So the glooms are these darker, this is a gloom here, another one here, gloom there. So these are those two structures right at the base of that collection of individual flowers are the glooms. And within those glooms, you have your spikelet. So in this Melica nutans, we have our glooms here at the base, and we then have one fertile flower and one potentially, and there's another fertile flower in here. So we have two flowers per spikelet in Melica and several flowers per spikelet in the Elytridia. By the way, this structure here, the ELA in the Melica nutans, is thought to be the reduction down of lots of previous flowers in this genus, which has now become a sort of a protein-filled little pocket of little sack of goodness, which is thought possibly to be utilized by the plant to get ants to distribute their seeds. Certainly that is the determination of the person who took this photograph, who I must say has a fantastic library of plant photographs should you need any. His name is Stefan Lefner. I found him through Wiki Commons, but he has his own website as well. So it's well worth, if you need a particular picture for something, they are a tribute and share alike on Wiki Commons. So well worth knowing about. Vegetative characteristics of grasses. Well, the first one that a lot of people go to whenever they're first looking at a grass in the field is, of course, the ligule. Here we have our lovely cocksfoot again, Dactylus glomerata, with its superb ligule. Then we have Melica nutans again. But this time we've got this tiny ligule. It's still there. This little membranous structure at the top of the leaf sheath and before the leaf blade comes away. So that is still a membranous ligule. It just happens to be very tiny. And here we have our Dansonia decumbens again, the heath grass. And it's, along with a few other grasses in Britain and Ireland, it has including the common reed, beg your pardon, I keep getting that wrong, and purple moorgrass, has a ligule that is composed of hairs rather than a membrane. And that is an important characteristic and a really nice one for whenever you find it in the field, especially if you're like me and don't stop botanizing just because it happens to be winter. So in our rhyme, grasses had nodes from their heads to the ground. And a node is basically where a leaf sheath starts. So we can see here our leaf sheath is coming to an end. We've got our ligule, we have our leaf blade, and just above that, we have a node, which is the beginning of another leaf sheath, and therefore another leaf blade further up, and ligule, of course. This is in Agrostis stolonifera, with this lovely long ligule. Here we have Phleum pratense or Timothy, and you can just about see these little nodes, little dark shining nodes going up, little swellings going up the stems. And each leaf will start at a little swelling. There'll be a leaf sheath and then a leaf blade. So here, this node here is going up to that, sorry. This node here, it's a much easier one to see. It's going up to there when the blade comes away. But another node here, which is going up. That blade has been broken off, but the leaf sheath is still there. And the same on this side. So nodes are quite useful if you're looking at something that doesn't have any flowers left. And you want to check whether you're dealing with a sedge or grass. Have a look to see if you have lumps on the stems. If you've got the lumps, the nodes, then it's a grass. In Europe, certainly in the so once you get to the tropics, you have to start worrying about stuff like that. Another really good vegetative characteristic for grasses, which it's key to remember, are the presence or absence thereof of what are called auricles, basically mean ears. And they are an expansion of, let's stop doing that. They are a sort of inflation of the leaf blade that comes right round to the absolute edge of the leaf sheath. In this Melica, we go back to this again, you can see that it is contiguous. The leaf sheath splits and comes around, and there is no auricle here. In this Festuca, it has changed name. I apologize. I forgot to look up the new name because I'm afraid to say I still remember it as Festuca arundinacea as well as Stefan. So we have our auricles, which are these expansions of the material out. So rather than the leaf sheath sort of going straight into the leaf, as it does with Melica, you get this expansion, in this case, a nicely hairy ear for this Festuca arundinacea. And then for another Festuca, which again has also changed name because it has auricles, you have not just this expansion sort of going out like a fantastically 1970s collar on the leaf sheath, but it actually overlaps as well. You can just about see that there. So the 2 points sort of overlap each other. So auricles are an important characteristic to help you determine grass is true. Coming to structures that are found on the flowers of grasses, awns are a very important part of grass structures. And often they are found on the part of the flower which is not a glume. So these are the 2 glooms at the bottom here. sort of smaller one and a larger one. And this is false oak grass, Arenatherum elatus. And you can see this structure that starts at about 1/3 up the back of this larger green structure here, which is part of the flower, an individual flower, and goes up, bends slightly and goes off. This is our awn, and this is an awn which is inserted onto the back of what's called the lemma. And a lemma and the other structure here, the palea, which you can see quite nicely in this particular picture from Nardus stricta, are what are left of the carpels, sorry, the sepals. So our green structures that you would find at the back of a rose or a buttercup. Here they have become a structure which one is larger, more thicker, highly vascularized, and highly protective. And then the other part is frequently just a translucent membrane, as you can see nicely again in this picture here. Between them, the lemma and the palea, those make up an individual flowering structure. Inside that, you have the ovary at the base down here. You will have a two-branched, very fluffy stigma coming off the top of the ovary. And you will have usually 3 stamens for each individual flower. You can, this flower here has still got its stamens. They haven't matured yet, but they're developing. So this is the palea for this lemma, and that palea there, this structure, this silvery structure, belongs to this lemma. And again, these technical terms, these particular, the change in terminology for the morphology that you're seeing in the floral anatomy that you're seeing in grasses is again something I think I find quite off-putting when I first started looking at grasses properly. So try and remember them as being those 2 things are sepals. You just have lost one. The petals have reduced down to structures which are called lodicules, which sometimes you can see quite easily, and other times they're extremely small. But the petals have become lodicules. So these are your sepal structures. These are your bracts, sepals, and down there somewhere are your lodicules, which are your petals. And then you have your male reproductive organs and your female reproductive organs. So that's a typical grass flower. Recognizing that this is an awn is important. Recognizing that the awn is on the lemma rather than a glume is important. But beyond that, after that, it's a very sort of a reduced flower that you're looking at. Think of the rush flower in parts of 3s, and then you've got this reduced down to 2 sepals rather than 3 sepals, 2 petals as lodicules rather than 3 petals, 3 stamens rather than 6, and only 2 stigma rather than 3. But interestingly, we only get a single seed in grasses. So one of those stigma is there to help collect pollen, but doesn't actually get its own ovary and ovule to fertilize. In the this is Nardus stricta. This is the grass that turns a very pale yellow on overgrazed hillsides around in any upland area. Very, very rich in silicon and grass, and therefore sheep won't eat it because it wears their teeth down too badly and too quickly. Very reduced flowers. It does have glooms, but they're highly reduced. You can't see them in this picture. I have another picture coming up where they are. So we just have our lemma and our palea and our flower in the center. But the awn here is at the tip of the lemma rather than from the back of the lemma. And then we have here, this is Timothy again. These are individual flowers, just 1 flower per structure, which has got 2 glooms. And our glooms are the ones with the points this time. So awns are important and worth getting your head around. Number of flowers in the spikelet can be tricky to tell, but it is possible, but it takes a little bit of practice and patience and belief that, you know, it is possible to do. I wouldn't start with very small flowers, but having said that, the bents, the genus Agrostis, only ever have a single flower per spikelet. So if you're looking at something that tiny and you really can't tell, then the possibility is, especially if it's just got two little sort of, the empty flowers have just got two little, very, very tiny flowers. But Agrostis are both the trickiest and actually in some ways the easiest, because there's only ever one flower per spikelet. Narda stricta, we only have one flower, like Agrostis. With our false oak grass, we have two flowers, only ever two flowers per spikelet, and only one of the lemmas has an awn, the other one doesn't. And then we have, this is crested dog's tail, Cynosaurus cristata. We have our glooms, which are basically just a sort of a tissue-y structure with a green vein. So just only the vein, the sort of vascular bundles have got any colour. And we've got one, that's one flower. We've got another flower here, another flower there, and another flower there. So this is the most mature, next, third, and fourth. Behind it, which you can't really see, but it's well worth having a look whenever you see crested dogtail in the summer, there is another spikelet of entirely sterile flowers. So here we have 3, 4 flowers per spikelet. So the number of flowers varies from genus to genus and also within genera. So it's well worth having a look as carefully as you can at those. The gloom size can be really helpful, especially whether or not the size is even. So here we have Avena fatua, which is it is a cousin, excuse me, of oats, the cereal crop, which also have these very large papery glooms. And inside we have 2 seeds, each with an awn, in this case a twisty awn, which helps to drill, gets wet and helps to drill the seed into the ground. So those are very large glooms, very persistent after the fact as well. This is an Agrostis flower. These glooms on the Avena are probably getting up to about 20 millimeters long. These glooms are about 2 millimeters. So you can see this is a really tiny flower, which is why it's helpful to know that it's only got one flower in it, because it's a pain in the bum, excuse my language, to dissect this, especially in the field. So we have our anthers, our female reproductive stigma here, our palea, and our lemma. And all the colour and silica and everything is in the glooms. And here is our Narda stricta again. So I remember I said that it does have glooms, but they're highly reduced. So those little tiny green points just below each of those purple flowers, that is what's left of the glooms in Narda stricta. So it's an extremely highly reduced flower. So we're going to move on to sedges now. And in the rhyme, sedges have edges. Well, yeah, quite a lot of them do. Quite a lot of them are triangular in shape, not usually quite so sharply so as in this Carex or Trubia, the false fox sedge, which has almost got sort of winged corners. Most are a bit more like this, which is Carex flacca. Sometimes they're a bit more sort of rounded, but if you are rolling them in your fingers, you can still feel that they have 3 sides. But we can also have, so we can have something like this, which is kind of 3-sided, but very nearly round. We can have this kind of structure, which is channeled. And then we can even have hexagonal. So the nature of the stem varies within sedges, but the majority of the sedges that we find in Britain and Ireland are do have 3 sides. So our wonderful hexagonal stem comes from flea sedge, Carex pulicaris, one of my absolute favourites. That channeled one with the 4-sided structure is Carex binervis. And the last one, that sort of almost round one, is one of the yellow sedges, Virigula eudicarpa, which I think used to be called, or maybe still has been called again, demissa. So stem cross-section in sedges can be really informative. And also the cross-section of leaves is often informative because they have air gaps in the leaves sometimes, which can help with the identification of the individual species. And also the leaf shape varies too. We've already come across ligules in Carex. This is just a diagram from the BSBI Carex book showing that ligules can vary in shape. And then we have the beak of the utricle, that flask that contains the seed. They can be quite long, can be sort of, they're always open at the top. They can have these little serrations of silica barbs down the sides. They can be incredibly flat, like in this Carex alata. Or medium-sized beaks. Sorry, these are very long beaks on this Leptocarpa, which is one of the yellow sedges. Or they can almost be sort of little balloons, as in Carex panacea. So we're going to have a look at rushes. We've looked at the flowers quite a bit already, but we're going to have a look at the stems quickly. So Juncus effusus has a solid, smooth stem which is filled with this structure within this called pith. However, others can be completely hollow. And if you take a sort of lateral transect through Juncus effusus, you'll see that the pith is quite airy and open. And in Acutiflorus, sharp flowered rush, they are entirely empty and they just have these septum, these structures going across to help keep the tube open. And this stuff within Juncus effusus is made up of these sort of interesting cellular structures called parenchyma, and it helps to allow air through and down, up and down the plant to the roots. You've maybe heard of making rush lamps. Well, this is a stem of conglomeratus, Juncus conglomeratus. You can tell that also from the very highly ridged, dull stem. It's a much denser pith. So if you were ever going to be doing experimental archaeology and you wanted to try making a rush lamp, which is basically extracting the pith from the inside of a rush leaf and then dipping it in wax or tallow, and you burn it to give you a small amount of light. And the saying, burn at both ends, comes from rush lamps, where you would light both ends of your pith candle, and it would burn twice as fast because they're not very big. And then our lovely flowers, just to finish off with. This is the flower of the toad rush, Arbifonus. This is Girardii. Sorry, no, it does not. That's Girardii. And this one, which is one of the coastal rushes. And then this one, I think, was effusus, maybe. No, it wasn't. I can't remember. I'm terribly sorry. Oh, it was articulatus. Sorry about that. Thank you very much for your attention. there is a list of all the links that I have used for pictures at the end, whenever you come to, if you come to review it again. But if you remember the name Stefan Leffner, you will, and you're interested, go to Wikicommons and you'll find a huge trove of fantastic photographs there, and with links to his website. Thank you very much. I look forward to any questions you might have for me, and to answering those as well as I can.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much, Jen. So already in the chat, so we had, sorry, I haven't spoken and my throat has seized up. Can we ask the name of the Wikimedia photographer again? Oh, you just told us. Brilliant, fantastic. You're preempting the questions. Could you recommend any beginners ID books?
For grasses, sedges, and rushes.
For grasses, sedges, and rushes. I'm assuming based on the topic, yeah.
Well, I have to admit that it's probably not the most obvious. Can you see that okay? Is that in focus?
Yes, I can see that, yeah.
Yeah, so Collins' Wildflower Guide is, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, an extremely good book. It's good value for anybody who's interested in plants. It goes right from horsetails all the way up to all of the monocots, including the grasses, sedges, and the rushes. The nice thing about it is that the keys that they have in this book are user-friendly. You're not going to be looking at Hubbard-esque keys for grasses or such like. It is even for, if you can go through a key with something that you know, so if you know you've got cocksfoot grass, for example, go through the key with that. It's a really simple technique for going through keys, any key initially, I feel, is to do something that you kind of, you know what it is, and you're working the key, seeing where you maybe get tripped up a bit, and sort of figuring out by going backwards slightly, sort of, okay, what was it there that sort of, confused me? Was it the book and how it referred to things, or was it something that I just didn't quite get? Another book which I love and started me off on my ventures into identifying grasses, sedges, and rushes is this one, which is a brilliant book. It's I think probably your best bet in guessing this is to look in secondhand bookstores and online as well. It is a fabulous book. The keys are incredibly good in terms of the ease of use, and the pictures are large and detailed, and it's a beautiful book to use. He explains everything incredibly well, and it is well worth seeing if you can find one.
Could you hold up a bit higher so everyone can see it?
Yes, of course. Is that better?
Oh no, it's out of focus because of the fuzzy. There it. We had it for a moment. What I can do for everybody is
we can put that in the notes.
We'll put a link afterwards, and also it is the colour identification guide to the grasses, sedges, rushes, and ferns of the British Isles and northwestern Europe by Francis Rose.
Absolutely.
So there's the name of it as well. Excellent. And I'm just having a look online, and yeah, I can see what you're saying about it. Yeah, it seems to be mostly second-hand copies. Yes. Okay.
Another little book which is definitely easier to find than Francis Rose is A Field Guide to Grasses, Sedges, and Rushes by Dominic Price, which again we will put the details of in the chat afterwards. One of the nice things about it is that he gives you options based on habitat. So if you know that you're dealing with heathland and dry acid grasslands, then you get a range of different options of sedges and rushes and grasses that might be present. It's a very neat little book. It's very user, it's very handy, and it's printed by the Species Recovery Trust.
Oh, I found it, yes. Now, how comprehensive is that?
It's not hugely comprehensive. It doesn't cover everything, but if you're only getting started, if you're just getting, beginning to dip your toe in to identifying grasses, sedges, and rushes, then it's a good little book, especially if you're dealing with, if you're somebody who works in particular habitats or such like.
And I can see £14 on the Species Recovery Trust website, so a very affordable starting point as well.
Yeah, not bad at all.
Excellent. We've got, please could you go back over the differences between the awns and the glooms? Also, how to tell the difference between lemma and palea in grasses with only one flower per spikelet. I'm happy to repeat the other half
that's
again.
Absolutely fine. No, that's absolutely fine. Let me just scroll back as quickly as my computer will allow me. Right. So the first bit was about awns, is that correct?
Yeah, the differences between awns and glooms.
Awns and glooms. Okay. I'm going to go one further. Okay. So with flower, the grass flower, you will, apart from things like the Narda stricta, which I showed you with extremely reduced glooms, so it doesn't have any glooms at all. There will always be glooms associated with your grass flowers. It doesn't matter whether you've got 2, 1, several flowers associated with those glooms. There will always be glooms at the base of that spikelet, that flowering spikelet. So here we've got these glooms, which are, as I said before, sort of silvery with a green vein. These ones have got a little bit of color. There's more than one vein, I think, certainly on this larger of the glooms. Awns, however, are frequently associated with an individual flower. So like in this false oak grass, the awn is attached to the back of the lemma. So remember, the lemma's a sepal, which has changed form and function, basically, especially the palea. So the palea and the lemma make up a bit sort of like a clam shell. Palea is sitting on top of that nice, big, deep, protective, strong lemma. And the palea is just there to sort of keep everything in while it matures. It doesn't have to be particularly strong because it'll either be up against a gloom or up against another flower. Whenever you have so here we've got little tiny, on the Sinusoris cristatus, we've got tiny little awns coming off the top of the lemma, unlike this huge awn coming off the back of this false oat grass. Just trying to find, there he is, our Timothy. When you have an awn on the top of the gloom, it seems to be an extension of the midrib, which sometimes is the case here, like with this Narda stricta, where the awn is this really long elongation of the lemma, and extremely, if we could see that in closer detail, it would be covered in little sort of silica spikelets, little hooks and things. So glooms don't necessarily have awns, flowers don't necessarily have awns, but the awns on flowers will always be associated with the lemma and not the palea. So there was another question about the difference between lemmas and paleas. I Let me see, have I got a better? Yeah. So unusually for what I was just saying about Paleas usually being very filmy and quite delicate, in this case, the Palea is still quite green. So it's much easier to see, to relate to the idea that both the lemma and the Palea have evolved from green sepals, which would have been associated with the rest of the reproductive organs in a grass flower or its ancestor's flower, as you still see in the juncus, the rush flowers. The glooms are, as I said before, the glooms are always associated with grass flowers, but they are always below any number of flowers that were in an individual spikelet. So grass flower equals, spikelet equals one or many grass flowers held within the embrace of two glooms at the base of that spikelet. So you only get glooms at the base of the spikelet. The glooms here, just two glooms with lots of flowers inside. In this case, it's two glooms with only two flowers inside. If this was the other Melica, which the name of which has just escaped my brain entirely, they would only have one flower, and again that would just be the same. So the agrostis, I think sorry for going back through things. There we go. This agrostis is exactly the same. We've got two glooms, which remember are equivalent to our bracts. Then we have our lemma and our Palea, which in this case, because the glooms are so robust and there's only one flower, these are they have lost a lot of their chlorophyll and their structure, sort of the strength that they would have otherwise. So that's one flower. Our lemma and Palea are equivalent to our sepals, and we have our female flower parts here with the stigma, nice and fluffy, little feathery stigma, and then our three stamens, which have lost their pollen by this stage. There was another question, I think, was there, James, related to that?
So the question was difference between awns and glooms. How to tell the difference between lemma and Palea in grasses with only one flower per spikelet?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because one flower per spikelet is frequently tiny, as in agrostis. If you're lucky enough to get something where the lemma is green and the Palea is filmy, it's sort of translucent and silvery, that's usually the sort of the best way of distinguishing between them. It's rare, I have to say, for the Palea to be as green and robust as it is in this Melica nutans, in the wood millet. So usually the lemma will be the bigger of the two. It'll be green or greener, and the Palea will be smaller and usually just a membranous translucent structure, which basically just sort of holds all the flowering bits in the lemma while they're maturing.
Brilliant.
I hope
Thank you.
that's been helpful.
That sounds great to me. And whilst we're on anatomy, somebody else has asked the awn. Is the awn like a crown or spike hair on flower elements? So I wondered if perhaps you could just briefly revisit awns for us.
Yes, of course. So I think the awn has can have a function in terms of seed dispersal, especially whenever it is attached to the back of the lemma lower down and is bent. So if I go back to this relative of the oats, the awns in the earlier flowers will be straighter, and this bend in the awn becomes much more pronounced as the seeds mature and dry out. It's difficult to see, I appreciate, but if you were to look at, if you were to have a wee look at, Google a picture of Avena, either this one or the oats, you would see that the material around the surface of the awn, this whole thing is twisted, and it twists and as it dries. And in this case, whenever the seed falls onto the ground, it's usually heavier at the end attached to the plant. The awn, whenever it becomes wet, starts to untwist, and by untwisting, it starts drilling the seed into the ground away from the potentially being eaten by a mouse or some other small rodent. And in that case, it's very important in helping the seed get into the soil and have a good start. In the case of, beg your pardon, in the case of Nardus stricta, the awn attached to the top of the lemma is, as I said before, is just choco with silica, and that helps to stop things like sheep, any grazing animal, any herbivore, from eating the plant because it just hurts their teeth too much. For phloem, I think the awns here are possibly again something to do with making them just a bit less palatable to eat than because they would have quite a lot of deposition of silica, and they'd be quite sort of sharp and spiky for the soft palate of a deer or some such.
So I suppose, and I'm kind of revealing my ignorance here then, isn't an awn a distinct part of the anatomy, or is it something that, because like here it's attached to the lemma, is that always the case, or can awns grow out? I'm trying to work out how to, is an awn a feature that can grow on different parts, or is it always part of the lemma, or is it its own thing?
It's always part of the flower.
It's always part of the flower.
It's always part of the flower spikelets to somehow or other. It's usually part of the lemma. That's usually where you will find it. It's much less usually part of the glume. But yes, frequently if you find an awn, the likelihood is it is attached to the lemma, either at the tip of the lemma or the back of the lemma. Excellent. They can be quite robust, as they are in the false oatgrass and the Avena we were just looking at, or they can be quite sort of fine and hair-like, as they are in the foxtail grasses.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen.
No problem.
Rose. Rose. Oh, Rose. Hello, Rose. Rose gave one of our talks. How many species of sedges, grasses, and rushes are there in Ireland? Wow. Now,
off the top of my head, Rose.
Well, don't you worry, Jen, because whilst you were talking, I went on the BSBI database, and of course, if you're a member of the BSBI, you can get access to the database. And I looked up. Now, this number is going to include a few hybrids and bits and pieces, so it depends what you count. But for grasses, the Poaceae, 223 taxa. For the sedge family, 113, and for the rushes, 33. So there are going to be some hybrids in that. So the true number of species is going to be a bit lower than that. But it looks like we're looking at maybe a little over 300 species in total. Though I'm sure some of those are probably vanishingly rare, and some of them are probably weird one-off escapes or something like that as well. So
yes. Yeah, absolutely.
People say that grasses, sedges, and rushes are really hard. What do you think makes them trickier to ID? The size of all the bits, or general unfamiliarity? in your experience, at what point does it start to get easier?
Well, the point that it started to get easier for me was whenever I was able to equate what I was seeing in a grass flower with any other flower that I would have looked at. So with a rush flower, because it looks like a miniature, near enough like a miniature lily, for example, they're slightly easier to understand as sort of the different flowering structures. When it comes to grasses, that reduction and also the different terminology for the bit different parts of the flower really, I think, can cause quite a lot of headaches for anybody starting out, because sort of if you're told that it's got uneven glooms and the lemma has got sort of this or that and the pallias whatever and it's got however many loducules, as soon as you read that, if you don't have it in your head that okay, glooms are bracts, lemma and pallia are sepals, and loducules are what's left of the petals, okay, I can deal with that. It's helping yourself to be able to translate that very alien terminology into something which is relatable to what you have experience in already. And the same with, I have to admit, I didn't realize until I was doing the research for this webinar that the utricle, that little sort of flask structure in sedges, is the other gloom. So grasses have two glooms. Sedges used to have two glooms. They still have two glooms, but one of them now is the utricle, which has fused and formed a little flask around the seed to protect it while it's developing. So that the utricle always puzzled me. What is it? Where does it come from? But now I know, and that for my brain, it just sort of puts a little bit of a simplifier on things. So I think it's the terminology, and if you can relate it back to something that you're familiar with in terms of petals, sepals, blah blah blah, then it makes it just that bit easier to remember stuff. But you do have to be able to get your head around it to build your confidence in actually identifying things. So remembering that a spikelet is enclosed by two glooms, which is always closest to the stem of the grass, and that your flowers are basically a lily flower, which is lost bits. Those two things help.
Brilliant, thanks, Jen. I'm conscious we're 10 minutes past, so we'll do one more question, but I'll do it but it's a two-part question, so we feel like we're getting a bonus. So the two-part question I'm serving you, Jen, is from Jan, and it is: how reliable are ligules on grasses as diagnostic features? I seem to have found some which don't match the books, e.g. downy oatgrass and marsh foxtail. And then the second part of the question, which I've appended, is also from Jan. Could you say a bit more about what is meant by a bent awn? How bent should it look to be called bent?
I'll do the awn thing first. Any notable, however subtle, deviation from 180 degrees straight line, if it's got even the slightest kink, especially at this sort of very early stage of the flowering process, that bend is likely to become more pronounced as the flower matures and dries and the seed dries. So yes, frequently they have a bend in them whenever they're from the back of the lemma. As I said before, because this is an extension of the midrib of the lemma in Nardus stricta, this isn't going to bend. It's always just going to be this long structure full of silica. Whereas this one, it is part of the midrib, but it's changed form and function. So it's doing something different. That doesn't mean there isn't a midrib going up behind it. It just means that the midrib vascular bundle, the major vascular bundle for the lemma has split. And this bit is going off to be the awn, which basically it grows and then sort of dries out, while the rest of it, the lemma, does its thing. And then its function comes whenever the seeds are being dispersed, either by catching onto fur of animals or drilling things into the ground or whatever else. Yeah. I hope that's a reasonably adequate response for you, Jan. Could you remind me of the first bit of that, since I got carried away on
ligules as diagnostic features?
Ligules. Yeah, don't rely purely on ligules. They are very important, but finding a ligule which hasn't been damaged, especially as you get later into the season, is tricky. And because you're more likely to find, more likely to be able to see the ligule on the flowering stems, the leaves and leaf sheaves going up the flowering stem. Later in the season, of course, they will be drying out and dying off, and the leaves will be whipping around in the wind and etc. So ligules are important, but if you can't reliably find a good ligule, then you need to rely on other characteristics of the plant. And also, you have to remember that the images in books, however good that book is, even if it's the BSBI grass book, they are a snapshot in time. They are the ligule at its most perfect. That's why you frequently get a range of lengths. It's a tricky one, and but don't be, if you're confident in your identification, but the ligule wasn't quite right, I wouldn't stress over it too much. It would be something, if you encounter that species again at an earlier time of year, whenever the ligules are likely to be fresher, then have another go and see if the ligules are a bit more consistent with what the books are telling you. But if you're identifying, if you're wanting to identify between smooth and rough meadowgrass, the Poa pratensis and Poa trivialis, then the ligule's vital. Just having that ligule characteristic is a brilliant way of doing it, because often those little silica barbs that make Poa trivialis rough get rubbed off as well. So yeah, ligules are a mixed bag in terms of the usefulness, but they are well worth looking at, is what I would say.
Excellent. Thank you ever so much. Apologies if we didn't get through every single question. If we can, we will have a look at what's left, and we might be able to put something in the comments on in the description of the YouTube video.
Yeah, happily. Yeah.
But other than that, thank you ever so much, Jen, for your time this evening. It's been absolutely wonderful. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to the grass season and finally cracking them to my own satisfaction. And thank you also once again to our funder Dara for making this project and all of these webinars possible. We will download this video and put it up on YouTube, and then we'll send all of you an email. That might take a couple of days, so bear with us. And then, of course, you can look at the rest of our recordings, which are on YouTube. There'll also be a link to the rest of the webinar program in case there's anything coming up that you'd be interested in and like to book onto as well.